The thumb hovered over the send button, a tiny gray missile aimed at the heart of his old life. Kieran's breath caught in his chest, a shallow, ragged thing. The message was simple, brutally so. 7 words that would sever the last frayed threads connecting him to his late wife's family. "I've filed for bankruptcy. I've lost everything." He pressed down. The blue bubble appeared, a quiet confirmation of detonation. Sent. He lowered the phone to the scarred wooden surface of his kitchen table. The silence in the small apartment was suddenly immense, a physical weight pressing down on him. It wasn't just quiet. It was the sound of absence. The absence of Sarah's laugh, the absence of a future he had once taken for granted, and now the impending absence of the people who were supposed to be his family. He had done it. He had laid his failure bare, a sacrificial offering to their judgment. He knew what would come next. Silence. Or worse, a single, clipped message of scorn from Sarah's brother Marcus, followed by more silence. They had tolerated him after Sarah's death, their grief a thin veneer over a long-held disapproval of her choice. A quiet man who worked with his hands, a man without pedigree or ambition in their eyes. His financial ruin would be the final justification, the proof they had been right all along. He looked around the room, a space defined not by what it had, but by what it held. Amara's crayon drawings were taped to the refrigerator, a riot of color against the beige appliance. Her tiny sneakers were by the door, a smudge of mud on one toe. Her laughter, the brightest sound in his world, still echoed faintly from her bedtime story an hour ago. For her, he had swallowed his pride. For her, he had sent that text. The community aid programs required full disclosure, and he couldn't hide it from them any longer. It was better to rip the bandage off himself. A single car passed on the street below, its headlights cutting a brief, sweeping arc across his living room wall. He didn't move. He just sat there in the dim light, a captain who had scuttled his own ship, waiting for the cold water to rise. He expected nothing. He braced himself for the profound, echoing loneliness of being a man utterly adrift. He thought he was preparing for the end of one chapter, the final bitter postscript to his life with Sarah. He had no idea he was standing at the beginning of another, and from that moment, everything changed. Days passed. The silence he had anticipated from his in-laws arrived on schedule, cold and absolute. It was a tangible thing, a wall of indifference that confirmed his isolation, but Kieran had little time for self-pity. His world was small, but it was dense with responsibility. Mornings began before the sun, in the quiet hum of the old apartment building. He would rise, his movements practiced and silent, careful not to wake the small girl sleeping in the next room. His first task was always the same, checking on Amara. He'd push her door open a crack, the scent of lavender from her nightlight filling the hallway. She slept with the fierce stillness of a child, her small chest rising and falling, her natural hair, which he had painstakingly twisted the night before, forming a soft halo around her head on the pillow. Beside her, clutched in one hand, was Barnaby, a teddy bear worn smooth with love. He was a tall man, with the broad shoulders and calloused hands of someone who worked in logistics, lifting and moving the world's goods in a vast, anonymous warehouse. His deep brown skin seemed to hold the permanent exhaustion of the past 2 years, but his eyes, when he looked at his daughter, were clear and fiercely gentle. He carried his grief for Sarah not as a shroud, but as a quiet, internal compass. It guided his every action, his every decision. He was determined to be enough for Amara. He had to be. Their morning routine was a well-oiled dance of quiet domesticity. He'd start the coffee, then move to the kitchen to make Amara's breakfast. Oatmeal with a swirl of honey, just as she liked it. He would pack her lunch, a sandwich cut into a star shape with a cookie cutter he'd bought for $1, an apple, a juice box, Every item was a small act of love, a defense against a world that was often careless and cold. His clothes were worn but always clean, his work boots polished. He took care with what little he had, a quiet testament to his dignity. "Daddy," Amara's voice, bright and full of sleep, would call from her room. "Is it a sunshine day or a cloud day?" He'd smile, the expression softening the tired lines around his eyes. "It's a sunshine day, my love." She would emerge a moment later, a bundle of energy in colorful pajamas, her beaded braids clicking softly as she ran to hug his legs. Amara was 5, a tiny girl with eyes that saw everything. She spoke in long, breathless sentences, her thoughts tumbling out in a stream of observations and questions that often left him speechless with their simple wisdom. She was the repository of all his hope, the bright, burning center of his universe. He would kneel, his large frame folding to her level, and help her brush her teeth, his big hands surprisingly deft as he guided the small brush. He had learned to do her hair from online videos, his fingers, more accustomed to packing tape and box cutters, slowly mastering the art of twists and puffs. He was not his wife, he could never be. But he tried. Lord, how he tried. After Sarah's passing, he'd felt invisible, a ghost, haunting the edges of his own life. But Amara saw him. In her eyes, he was not a failure. He was just daddy. And that was everything. Far across the city, in a steel and glass tower that scraped the clouds, Naima Richmond commanded a boardroom. The table was a long, polished expanse of dark wood, reflecting the grim faces of a dozen executives. She stood at its head, a striking figure in a tailored navy suit. Her deep brown skin was luminous even in the harsh fluorescent lighting, and her natural hair was swept up in an elegant style that spoke of discipline and intention. Her voice was calm, precise, each word chosen with the care of a surgeon. She was dismantling a flawed quarterly report, her logic irrefutable, her authority absolute. There were no wasted gestures, no emotional flourishes. She was a fortress of competence. People in her world saw the power, the success, the name on the door of the corner office. They saw the woman who had taken a struggling tech firm and turned it into an industry leader. They saw the tailored suits, the quiet confidence, the car that waited for her downstairs. They did not see the woman who, hours later, would walk into a sprawling, minimalist apartment that felt more like a museum than a home. The silence that greeted her was different from Kieran's. His was filled with the echoes of love and loss. Hers was the sterile silence of emptiness. She would walk through the vast white spaces, her heels clicking on the marble floors. There were no crayon drawings on her stainless steel refrigerator. There were no tiny sneakers by the door. She had a team of people to manage her life, a housekeeper, a personal shopper, an assistant who scheduled every minute of her day. She had achieved everything her parents had demanded of her, surpassing even their most ambitious expectations. They had raised her to be a success, a testament to their own drive. They had taught her that love was conditional, a reward for performance, and so she had performed brilliantly. But in the quiet of her perfect apartment, with the glittering city lights spread out below her like a carpet of scattered jewels, Naima felt a profound and gnawing loneliness. She was respected, feared, admired, but she was not known. She was not loved for the woman who existed beneath the armor. She had built a kingdom of glass and steel, only to find herself its solitary prisoner, yearning for a simple, authentic connection she didn't know how to build. Her work included overseeing her company's philanthropic foundation, a duty she performed with the same detached efficiency as everything else. It was a line item, a public relations necessity. She approved grants and reviewed applications, her pen scratching signatures on checks for causes that felt abstract and distant. She had no idea that one of those routine files, passed to her by an assistant, was about to shatter the glass walls of her carefully constructed world. A week after the text message, the knock came. It was a Thursday evening, the sky outside a bruised purple. Rain was beginning to fall, streaking the window panes in Kieran's small living room. He was on the floor with Amara, helping her build a tower of colorful blocks. The knock was firm, unexpected. He froze. It couldn't be the in-laws. They would have called first, if they called at all, to announce their judgment. He felt a knot of anxiety tighten in his stomach. He scooped Amara up. "Stay here and play with Barnaby for a minute, sweetie. Daddy will be right back." He walked to the door, his heart thudding a slow, heavy rhythm against his ribs. He looked through the peephole and his confusion deepened. A woman stood on his doorstep, a black woman he had never seen before. She was holding a sleek leather portfolio and dressed in an elegant trench coat, her posture poised and straight despite the rain that was beginning to dampen her shoulders. She looked utterly, jarringly out of place in the dimly lit, worn hallway of his building. He opened the door a few inches. "Can I help you?" The woman met his gaze. Her eyes were intelligent, discerning, but held a trace of weariness he recognized. "Mr. Kieran Wallace?" she asked, her voice professional, controlled. "Yes," he said, his hand still on the doorknob. "My name is Naima Richmond. I'm with the Richmond Corporation's Charitable Foundation. May I have a moment of your time?" Kieran stared at her, baffled. "The Richmond? I'm sorry. I think you have the wrong address. I haven't applied for anything." A flicker of something, empathy perhaps, crossed her features before being suppressed. "We received an anonymous nomination on your behalf. It's our policy to conduct a brief, in-person assessment for all potential beneficiaries. It's just procedural." And then the pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. An anonymous nomination. It was Marcus. Of course it was Marcus. This wasn't silence. This was a new, more refined cruelty. To send a powerful executive to his humble door to witness and document his failure. It was a public shaming disguised as charity. A hot flush of anger and humiliation rose in his throat, but he swallowed it down. He would not give them the satisfaction. He looked at this polished, professional woman, a symbol of a world he would never know, and made a decision. He would meet this humiliation with dignity. For Amara, he opened the door wider. "Please come in." Naima stepped inside, her eyes taking in the small, clean apartment. She saw the worn sofa, the stack of children's books on the coffee table, the block tower on the rug. Her gaze landed on Amara, who was now peeking out from behind the armchair, clutching Barnaby the bear. "And who is this?" Naima asked, her voice softening almost imperceptibly. "This is my daughter, Amara," Kieran said, his voice quiet but steady. "Amara, this is Ms. Richmond." Amara took a tentative step forward. "Your shoes are very shiny," she said, a statement of fact. A genuine, startling smile briefly touched Naima's lips. It transformed her face, cracking the professional mask for just a second. "Thank you, your blocks are very colorful." The interaction was stilted, awkward. Naima sat stiffly on the edge of the sofa, opening her portfolio. Kieran remained standing, his arms crossed, a posture of quiet defense. She asked him a series of standard questions about his employment, his financial situation, his needs. He answered them honestly, his voice low and even, betraying none of the fury and shame churning inside him. He was a man being assessed, cataloged, judged. And yet, as she spoke, he noticed the small things. The way she didn't look down on his sparse furnishings, the way her eyes kept drifting to Amara's drawings on the fridge. There was a precision to her, but not a coldness. It was something else, a kind of guarded sorrow. The formal interview concluded, a sterile transaction in the heart of his home. Naima closed her portfolio, the click of the clasp sounding loud in the quiet room. "Thank you for your time, Mr. Wallace. That's all I need for now. The foundation will be in touch." She stood ready to retreat to her world of boardrooms and balance sheets, but as she moved toward the door, the heavens opened. The gentle rain became a torrential downpour, a wall of water drumming against the windows. A flash of lightning illuminated the room, followed by a loud clap of thunder that made Amara jump. "Whoa," Amara whispered, her eyes wide. "It seems the weather has other plans," Kieran said, a hint of dry humor in his tone. "You can't go out in that. Your shiny shoes will be ruined." He gestured to the sofa. "Please, wait it out. I can make some tea." Naima hesitated. Her schedule was precise, unforgiving. An unscheduled delay was a disruption. But the thought of navigating the flooded city streets, of returning to her vast, empty apartment, was suddenly less appealing than the prospect of a cup of tea in this small, warm room. "All right," she said, surprising herself. "Thank you." As Kieran moved to the kitchen, Amara, her shyness overcome by curiosity, approached Naima. She held up Barnaby. "This is Barnaby. He isn't scared of thunder. He's very brave." Naima looked from the girl's earnest face to the worn bear. "He looks very brave," she agreed solemnly. Kieran returned with 2 mugs of steaming ginger tea. He handed one to Naima. Their fingers brushed for a fraction of a second, a tiny, unexpected spark of warmth. They sat in a comfortable silence for a moment, listening to the rhythm of the rain. The professional boundary between them had been dissolved by the storm. They were just 2 people, waiting. "Why are you so sad?" Amara asked suddenly, her voice cutting through the quiet. She was looking directly at Naima, her head tilted. Naima was taken aback. No one ever asked her such a question. "I'm not sad," she replied, the denial automatic. "Yes, you are," Amara insisted, with the unshakable certainty of a child. "Your eyes look like my eyes when I miss my mommy." The words landed in the center of the room like a stone dropped into a still pond. The air crackled with unspoken emotion. Kieran's breath hitched. Naima stared at the little girl, her carefully constructed composure beginning to fracture. She saw not a child's impertinence, but a moment of stunning, unfiltered perception. This little girl saw past the suit, past the title, and straight into the hollow space in her chest. For the first time in years, Naima felt truly seen, and it was terrifying. And it was a relief. She didn't know what to say. She just looked at Amara, a storm of her own brewing behind her eyes. The rain continued to fall. The storm eventually subsided, leaving the city washed clean and glistening under the streetlights. Naima's departure was as formal as her arrival. But something had shifted between them. The assessment was no longer a simple transaction. It had become personal. When she got to her car, a sleek, expensive sedan parked down the block, she found it wouldn't start. The engine turned over with a pathetic, gurgling click. She sighed, resting her forehead against the cold steering wheel. It was the perfect, frustrating end to a disorienting evening. She was about to call for a car service when a tap on the window made her jump. It was Kieran, holding a large umbrella. He had seen her predicament from his window. "Trouble?" he asked through the glass. She rolled down the window. "It won't start. It's a new car. I don't understand." "Pop the hood," he said, his voice calm and reassuring. She did, and he went to work. He didn't seem bothered by the rain dripping from the umbrella onto his jacket. He moved with a quiet competence, his large hands knowing their way around the intricate machinery of the engine. Naima watched him from the driver's seat, a strange feeling washing over her. No one had ever just fixed something for her. Problems in her life were solved by delegation, by writing checks, by making calls. They were handled by paid professionals. Here was this man, a man she had come to assess for his poverty, performing an act of simple, unprompted kindness. He diagnosed the problem in minutes. A loose battery cable, a simple fix. He tightened it, wiped his hands on a rag he produced from his pocket, and closed the hood. "Try it now," he said. She turned the key, and the engine purred to life. A wave of relief, so profound it almost felt like grief washed over her. She got out of the car. "Thank you. I don't know what to say. How much do I owe you?" Kieran looked at her, a faint, wry smile on his lips. "You don't owe me anything, Ms. Richmond. It's just what people do, help each other out." He started to turn away. "Wait," she said, her voice more urgent than she intended. "Please, let me at least thank you properly." He simply nodded. "Drive safe." And he walked back to his building, leaving her standing in the misty night air, the sound of his words echoing in her mind. It's just what people do. Back in her car, alone in the humming quiet, Naima did something she hadn't done in over a decade. She cried. Not for the broken down car, but for the unexpected kindness, for the little girl who had seen her sadness, for the gaping chasm between her successful life and a genuinely fulfilled one. She returned the following week, using the excuse of needing a follow-up signature on a form. It was a flimsy pretext, and they both knew it. She found Kieran and Amara in the small patch of grass behind the apartment building, tending to a makeshift garden in a collection of pots and wooden crates. Amara was diligently watering a small tomato plant, her tongue stuck out in concentration. Kieran was turning over soil in a larger bin, his worn t-shirt clinging to his back. They looked up as she approached, her tailored dress and heels once again a stark contrast to their world. "Ms. Richmond," Kieran said, a hint of surprise in his voice. "Naima," she corrected him gently. "Please." Amara ran up to her, her hands covered in dirt. "We're making a food garden. Daddy says we can grow our own tomatoes, and they'll taste like sunshine." Naima crouched down to her level, careful not to get dirt on her clothes. "That sounds wonderful, Amara." "Do you want to help?" Amara asked, holding out a small, muddy trowel as if it were a crown jewel. Naima looked at the dirt, at her manicured nails, at the expensive fabric of her dress, and then she looked at the hopeful, open expression on the little girl's face. She took the trowel. For the next hour, Naima Richmond, CEO, sat on the grass and helped a 5-year-old girl plant basil seedlings. She felt the cool, damp earth in her hands. She listened to Amara's non-stop chatter about worms and butterflies. She watched Kieran, who worked beside them in a comfortable silence, occasionally offering a gentle instruction or a quiet word of encouragement. The sun was warm on her back. The air smelled of soil and growing things. For the first time in as long as she could remember, she wasn't performing. She wasn't negotiating. She was just being. Before she left that day, Amara came running up to her, clutching a piece of paper. "I made this for you," she announced, thrusting it into Naima's hands. It was a crayon drawing. It depicted 3 stick figures standing under a bright yellow sun. One was a tall man with brown skin. One was a small girl with brown skin and beaded braids that stuck out at right angles. And standing next to them, holding the little girl's hand, was another figure, a woman with brown skin, wearing a blue dress. "That's you," Amara explained, pointing a small, grubby finger. "You're the lady who needed a family." Naima stared at the drawing, her throat tight. A child's simple lines, her innocent, devastating words had articulated a truth she had barely been able to admit to herself. She looked from the drawing to Kieran, who was watching them, his expression unreadable, but gentle. In that moment, the formal pretext of her visits fell away completely. She wasn't here as a representative of a foundation. She was here because this small, warm space, with its crayon drawings and its fledgling garden, felt more like home than her own palatial apartment ever had. Her visits became a regular occurrence. She would show up after work, bringing groceries she'd bought at a local market instead of the gourmet store she usually frequented. They would cook together in Kieran's tiny kitchen. He taught her how to make his wife's recipe for stew, his movements patient as he showed her how to chop the vegetables. Their hands would brush as they reached for the same utensil. They talked, not about finances or business, but about their days, about Amara's latest mispronounced word, about the stubborn weeds in the garden. One evening, after Amara was asleep, they sat on the small balcony overlooking the street, the city lights twinkling in the distance. The air was cool and soft. "She still talks about her, you know," Kieran said quietly, breaking a long silence. "Sarah, her mom. She asks if she can see her in the stars." He wasn't looking for pity. He was simply stating a fact, sharing a piece of his heart. "I tell her that her mama is part of everything now, the sunshine, the rain, the tomatoes we're growing. That way, she's never really gone." He finally turned to look at Naima, his gaze direct and searching. "You have her eyes sometimes, when you smile. A real smile, I mean." Naima felt her defenses crumble. This man, who had every right to be bitter and broken, possessed a quiet strength and emotional intelligence that humbled her. He saw her. He saw the real smile beneath the practiced one. "My parents, they were builders," she found herself saying, the words coming out in a slow, halting confession. "They built an empire, and they wanted me to be their finest creation, perfect, polished, unbreakable." She traced a pattern on the railing with her finger. "I was a project, not a daughter. I never learned how to just be, how to sit on the grass and not worry about getting dirty." He didn't offer platitudes or easy reassurances. He just sat with her in the shared vulnerability, his presence a quiet anchor in the darkness. He had shown her his financial poverty without shame. Now she was showing him her emotional poverty without fear. They were two wounded people from different worlds, finding a common language in their shared loneliness. The quiet moment was a testament to the trust that had grown between them, fragile but real, like the seedlings in their garden. The world, however, does not easily tolerate such gentle things. The news of a high-powered CEO making regular visits to a bankrupt warehouse worker in a modest apartment building did not go unnoticed. Kieran's brother-in-law, Marcus, heard the whispers. His initial cruelty, born of spite and a sense of superiority, curdled into something uglier, greed. He saw Naima not as a person, but as an opportunity, a walking, talking bank vault that his brother-in-law had somehow stumbled upon. He showed up one Saturday morning, unannounced. Kieran had just returned from the grocery store, and Amara was at a neighbor's apartment for a play date, a small mercy Kieran would later be profoundly grateful for. Marcus pushed his way inside, his expensive suit and arrogant sneer filling the small space. "So this is the new setup," Marcus said, his eyes scanning the apartment with disdain. "Playing the poor, grieving widower card. I have to admit it's a good angle. Landed you a real whale." Kieran stood by the kitchen counter, his body tense, but his voice calm. "What do you want, Marcus?" "What do I want?" Marcus laughed, a harsh, unpleasant sound. "I want what's fair. Sarah was my sister. That Richmond woman, she's clearly taken a liking to you. Throwing money at her little pet project. A portion of that should go to her family, to us, as a tribute to Sarah's memory." "This has nothing to do with Sarah's memory," Kieran said, his voice low and dangerous. "And it has nothing to do with you. Naima is a friend." "A friend?" Marcus scoffed. "A woman like that doesn't have friends like you, Kieran. She has investments, and I'm here to make sure her investment pays out to the right people." Just then, there was a light knock on the door. It was Naima. She had planned to take Kieran and Amara to a fall festival at a local park. She opened the door, which Kieran had left ajar, and stepped in, her smile fading as she took in the scene. She saw the tension in Kieran's shoulders, the predatory look in Marcus's eyes. "Am I interrupting something?" she asked, her voice cool and level. Marcus's face lit up with a smug, oily charm. "Naima Richmond. An honor. Marcus Thorne. I'm Sarah's brother. Kieran's family." He extended a hand, which she ignored. "I was just telling him how wonderful it is that you're taking an interest. We, the family, are so grateful for your generosity." Naima's gaze was like ice. She had dealt with men like Marcus her entire professional life, men who saw human connection as a commodity, a lever to be pulled for personal gain. They were small, insecure, and ultimately predictable. She did not raise her voice. She did not engage in his drama. She simply shifted from friend to CEO, her posture straightening, her voice dropping into the calm, authoritative tone she used in the boardroom. "Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice cutting through his pretense, "my relationship with Kieran and his daughter is a private matter. The Richmond Foundation has concluded its assessment, and Mr. Wallace's case is now closed." Marcus's smirk faltered. "Closed? But he's destitute. He needs—" "What Kieran has," Naima interrupted, her eyes locking onto his, "is not something my foundation can quantify. And it is certainly not something you can claim a share of." She took a step forward, her presence suddenly immense, commanding the small room. "You nominated him for aid out of spite, hoping to humiliate him. Instead, you revealed only the poverty of your own character. Now I'm going to have to ask you to leave his home." Marcus was stunned into silence, deflated by her quiet surgical dismissal. He looked from Naima's unwavering face to Kieran's stony expression. He had come expecting to intimidate and extort. He had found a fortress he could not breach. He sputtered for a moment, then, with a final hateful glare at Kieran, he turned and left, slamming the door behind him. The silence he left behind was heavy. Kieran finally let out a long, shuddering breath, the tension draining from his shoulders. He looked at Naima, his eyes filled with a gratitude so profound it needed no words. He had been ready to fight his own battle, but she had stood for him. She had protected him. She had seen his worth and defended it against the world's ugliness. Naima turned to him, her expression softening. The CEO was gone, and the woman had returned. "Are you all right?" she asked gently. He could only nod, his throat thick with emotion. In that moment, she made her decision. She had come into his life to assess his need, but she had discovered her own. The world she came from, the world of men like Marcus, of transactional relationships and conditional affection, was bankrupt. This world, this small apartment filled with love and dignity, was rich beyond measure. "I'm withdrawing the foundation's file," she said, her voice quiet but certain. "You are not a charity case, Kieran. You are the wealthiest man I have ever met." She paused, taking a breath. "But Amara's future is important. I've spoken to my personal financial advisor. I'm setting up an educational trust for her, not from the foundation, from me. It's not charity. It's an investment in her, in this." Her gesture encompassed the room, the garden outside, the life he had built. It was her stand, a definitive choice to walk away from the cold calculus of her old life and invest her heart in the warmth of this one. She was choosing to belong. With Marcus's departure, the last shadow of the old world receded. He and the rest of Sarah's family became irrelevant, their cruelty rendered powerless. by the quiet strength of the bond that had formed between Kieran, Naima, and Amara. The dynamic shifted. Naima was no longer a visitor. She was part of the fabric of their lives. Her weekends were no longer spent reviewing reports in her silent apartment, but sitting on Kieran's worn sofa, helping Amara with a 500-piece puzzle of the solar system, her brow furrowed in concentration. She left a pair of comfortable flats by his door, a silent declaration that she belonged there. The professional tailored suits were often replaced by soft sweaters and jeans. She learned the simple rhythms of their life. The Saturday morning trip to the farmer's market, the Sunday afternoon ritual of making a big pot of soup for the week. She discovered the joy of an imperfect pancake, slightly burnt on one side, served with a proud flourish by a 5-year-old. These small domestic moments were a revelation to her. She had spent her life in pursuit of perfection, only to find true happiness in the beautiful, messy imperfection of a shared life. Kieran watched her transformation with a quiet sense of wonder. He saw the guarded, weary woman from that first rainy night slowly unfurl, revealing a warmth and a capacity for joy she had kept hidden, even from herself. He saw it in the way she would laugh, a full, genuine sound, when Amara told a silly joke. He saw it in the way she would instinctively reach out to steady Amara as she climbed on the playground. He saw it in the peace that settled on her face when she was simply sitting with them, reading a book while he paid bills at the kitchen table. He was falling in love not with the powerful CEO, but with the woman who knew how to listen to a child's breathless stories about space, the woman whose hands, once accustomed only to pens and portfolios, were now not afraid of a little dirt. Their love story was not one of grand declarations, but of small, accumulated acts of service and presence. It was in the cup of coffee he'd have waiting for her when she arrived after a long day. It was in the way she'd organize his mess of receipts into a neat pile. It was in the shared, silent understanding that passed between them over Amara's sleeping head. It was a love built on the solid foundation of kindness and mutual respect. 3 months later, on a crisp autumn afternoon, the three of them were in the community garden down the street, a project Kieran had started with some neighbors. The small pots from his backyard had expanded into a thriving plot of late-season vegetables and flowers. Naima, her hair tied back in a simple scarf, knelt in the dirt beside him, harvesting the last of the tomatoes. Her laughter rang out in the cool air, a sound that felt as natural and essential as the sunlight. Amara was a short distance away, drawing in a sketchbook with a set of new colored pencils Naima had bought her. Suddenly, Amara came running over, her face alight with purpose. She held up her sketchbook to Naima. "I finished it," she announced. Naima took the book, a smile already on her face. The drawing was familiar, yet different. It was the same 3 stick figures, a tall man, a small girl, a woman in a blue dress, but this time they were all holding hands. Above them, Amara had drawn not just a sun, but a house with a red door and a smoking chimney. It was a child's simple, perfect image of a family, of home. "It's beautiful, sweetie," Naima said, her voice thick with emotion. Amara pointed to the drawing, her small finger tapping the page. "See," she said, looking up at Naima with her wise, old eyes. "I told you. You're not the lady who needed a family anymore. Now you're just our Naima." Naima's breath caught. She looked from the drawing in her hands to Kieran, who was watching her, his dark eyes shining with a love so deep and steady it took her breath away. He reached out and took her hand, his calloused, dirt-stained fingers lacing through hers. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. In his touch, in his gaze, she felt the promise of forever. It wasn't a proposal born of pomp and circumstance, but a quiet, profound commitment forged in the rich soil of everyday life. The narrator's voice came then, warm and reflective, a final grace note on their story. For in the end, true wealth is not found in the sterile vaults of banks or the cold gloss of a corporate tower. It is measured in the warmth of a hand that fits perfectly in yours. It is counted in the number of crayon drawings on a refrigerator door. Family is not always the one we are born into, but the one we have the courage to choose. It is built not on obligation, but on the brave and simple decision to show up, to care, to stay. Love is not something you find when you are finally perfect enough to deserve it. It is something that finds you in your brokenness, and in the quiet, gentle work of healing, makes you whole. It is the profound relief of being seen, not for what you have achieved, but for who you truly are. And for Naima, Kieran, and Amara, standing together in the golden afternoon light, their hands intertwined, they were the richest people in the world. They had found their home.